It started as a whisper of illness, a flicker of fatigue that anyone might dismiss. But for 37-year-old Emily Carter, a devoted mother of 6 and beloved pediatric nurse in a quiet Utah suburb, that whisper would soon crescendo into tragedy. Emily had always been the steady center of her family, the type of woman who packed lunches before dawn, attended every school play, and still managed to volunteer at the local clinic. Her husband, Dr. Matthew Carter, was a respected chiropractor, well known in town for his charm and professionalism. To friends and neighbors, they seemed like the picture of suburban success, the kind of couple who had it all. But beneath the veneer of stability, something was quietly unraveling. It began in early spring. Emily started feeling dizzy during her shifts, waves of nausea and blinding headaches that struck without warning. At first, she brushed them off. Probably just exhaustion, she told her colleague, Megan Lewis, as they stocked medical supplies one afternoon. 6 kids and a full-time job will do that. But soon, the symptoms worsened. Her hands trembled while charting patient notes. Her vision blurred. She began vomiting between shifts, clutching the counter for balance as waves of dizziness overtook her. Concerned, her coworkers urged her to go to the ER. Emily went, not once, but several times, each visit ending with inconclusive tests and doctors scratching their heads. The results showed nothing abnormal. Her vitals fluctuated wildly, but her blood work seemed fine. She was sent home each time with vague reassurances. By late May, she could barely stand. Her once vibrant face was pale and gaunt, her energy gone. Megan began to suspect something wasn't right, not medically, but personally. "You need to tell Matt," she said one day. "Something's seriously wrong." Emily forced a weak smile. "He's been so busy with work," she murmured. "I don't want to worry him." But worry would soon be the least of anyone's concerns. One night, after another bout of violent vomiting, Emily collapsed in her kitchen. Her oldest daughter found her lying on the cold tile, barely conscious. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, where she suffered a sudden seizure, her body convulsing under harsh fluorescent lights as alarms echoed down the hall. Doctors placed her on life support. Megan stood outside the ICU window that night, her heart sinking. She couldn't shake an unsettling memory. A few weeks earlier, she had noticed something strange at the clinic. A package, small, discreet, labeled as containing hazardous chemicals, had been delivered to the back office. It was addressed not to the clinic itself, but directly to Dr. Matthew Carter. When the office manager questioned it, Matt brushed it off. "Just a cleaning agent I ordered for the practice," he said with a practiced smile. No one pressed further. But Megan remembered how he'd been in the break room later that same day, mixing something into Emily's smoothie before handing it to her with a cheerful, "You really need to take care of yourself, Em." Now, staring through the ICU glass at her friend's motionless body, Megan's mind replayed every moment, the dizziness, the shipment, the drinks. Her gut told her something was very, very wrong. And when investigators later arrived at the hospital, armed with warrants, laptops, and quiet determination, they would discover that the truth was far darker than anyone could have imagined. The sterile hum of machines filled Emily Carter's hospital room. Tubes snaked across her motionless body, monitors blinking in quiet defiance against the inevitability everyone feared. Her family gathered in silent disbelief, 6 children, the youngest barely 2, staring up at the machines that kept their mother alive. Matthew stood beside them, his face composed but unreadable. He stroked Emily's hair gently, whispering words no one could quite hear. To the casual observer, he looked like a grieving husband, devoted, heartbroken, desperate for a miracle. But for those who knew how to look deeper, something about his calmness felt wrong. Outside that glass door, suspicion was beginning to take form. It started with the office manager, Janet Rhodes, who'd been unsettled ever since that chemical shipment arrived at the clinic. She had looked it up afterward, the return address linked to a research supply company specializing in toxicology agents used in laboratory experiments, not cleaning products. When she mentioned it to Megan, the two women agreed to contact authorities. Within days, detectives from the county sheriff's office quietly opened an investigation. They began with the clinic's security footage and inventory logs. One clip immediately stood out, a recording from 2 weeks before Emily's collapse. In the video, Matthew was seen entering the clinic after hours, carrying a small silver vial and a laptop bag. He stayed for 45 minutes, leaving with the vial missing from the counter. Investigators also discovered a trail of online orders placed from Matthew's home IP address, substances labeled with scientific names few people could pronounce, but all flagged as potentially hazardous or lethal. Among them were chemicals known to cause nausea, seizures, and organ failure. Meanwhile, Megan was tormented by guilt and fear. She had always trusted Matthew. He'd been charismatic, polite, the kind of man who brought coffee for the nurses and remembered everyone's birthdays. But now, when she replayed the small details in her mind, the way he'd insist on making Emily's drinks, his sudden possessiveness about her diet, his frequent late nights, it all took on a sinister light. Detectives soon reached out to the hospital, requesting access to Emily's medical samples. Her blood, drawn during one of her earlier ER visits, was sent for specialized toxicology screening. The results were staggering. Traces of a rare compound commonly used in industrial research, thallium sulfate, a toxin once banned for household use decades ago due to its deadly effects. When the results came back, the lead investigator, Detective Ryan Miller, sat in stunned silence. "If that's what's in her system," he murmured, "someone's poisoning her slowly." The next step was to verify who had access to such a compound. The supplier of the earlier shipment confirmed it had been ordered under Matthew Carter's professional account. The purchase description matched the same chemical found in Emily's blood. Detectives decided to act quietly. They obtained a warrant for Matthew's home, fearing he might destroy evidence if he learned of their suspicions. The search revealed a chilling scene, several containers hidden in a garage cabinet, some half-empty and unmarked. On his laptop, a digital trail of searches sent a cold shiver through the forensic analyst, queries like: how to administer poison without detection, non-metallic toxins that mimic natural illness, thallium side effects in humans. There were even bookmarked videos about dissolving toxic metals in beverages and discussions on obscure online forums about clean methods of homicide. At the same time, financial investigators found multiple life insurance policies totaling nearly $1.5 million, all recently updated to name Matthew as the sole beneficiary. The family's finances told a story of strain, overdue business loans, credit card debt, and a chiropractic practice losing clients fast. When questioned, friends recalled how Emily had confided about tension in their marriage. She said he'd become distant, Megan told detectives. But she never imagined he'd hurt her. By late June, the case had shifted from a mystery illness to a suspected attempted homicide. Investigators moved swiftly, aware Emily's life hung by a thread. On a humid Friday morning, Detective Miller stood outside the Carters' home as officers moved in. Inside, Matthew sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through his phone when he heard the knock. The officers entered, calm but firm, presenting the warrant. As they began to search, his expression didn't change, not fear, not anger, only a quiet, unsettling detachment. "What's this about?" he asked. Miller looked him straight in the eye. "It's about your wife, Dr. Carter. And what's been happening to her." For the first time, Matthew's confident mask flickered. The tide was turning. The sound of latex gloves snapping filled the Carter kitchen as investigators worked methodically, their movements deliberate and tense. The morning sun spilled through the blinds, cutting across the table where Dr. Matthew Carter sat motionless, his hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing. Detective Ryan Miller paced slowly, scanning the room. "We're here because we found substances in your wife's blood that don't belong there," he said evenly. Toxins. Ones you ordered. Matthew's lips twitched, almost a smile. I'm a medical professional, detective. I handle chemicals all the time. You can't just assume. Except, Miller interrupted, you don't work in toxicology. You're a chiropractor. So explain why you ordered compounds that can kill a person with less than a teaspoon. The silence that followed was suffocating. In the adjoining room, technicians photographed rows of vitamin bottles and powders neatly arranged on the counter. Each was labeled with tape, morning mix, energy smoothie, detox blend. But when forensics later tested them, the results would confirm what everyone feared, traces of thallium and another rare neurotoxin, both consistent with what was found in Emily's system. At the police station, Matthew's initial composure began to crack. He claimed he'd been experimenting with alternative supplements for his patients, that any dangerous chemicals must have been sent by mistake. But detectives had already uncovered more, messages on his phone that hinted at a motive far darker than scientific curiosity. A string of texts to a woman named Rachel Dean, a real estate agent from a nearby town, painted a clear picture of a secret affair. They'd met 6 months earlier during a property showing, and the messages told a story of lust, deception, and reckless promises. Once this is all over, we'll have everything. She's been sick for weeks now. The timing's lining up. Rachel, when later brought in for questioning, appeared genuinely shaken. He told me his marriage was over, she said, trembling. He said Emily was ill, but I thought it was natural. I swear, I never knew. But detectives knew otherwise. On her phone, they found a chilling message sent just days before Emily's final collapse. Be patient, Rach. It's almost done. After this, we're free. Meanwhile, Emily remained in a medically induced coma. Her organs were failing, one after another. Her family gathered at her bedside every day, praying for a miracle. Her eldest son, only 16, asked a nurse if his mom would ever wake up. No one had an answer. As the investigation intensified, financial records painted the final stroke of Matthew's plan. His chiropractic practice had been bleeding money for years. He'd refinanced the family home twice, racked up tens of thousands in credit card debt, and used Emily's nursing income to cover most of the household expenses. With 6 children to support and a failing business, he had seen no way out, except one. The life insurance policies were the key. Detectives found that he had recently increased the coverage on Emily to over $1 million. The change had been made just weeks before her first hospital visit, with forged signatures on several documents. Detective Miller's team was building a timeline that fit together seamlessly. April, Matthew begins ordering chemicals online. May, Emily experiences unexplained nausea and dizziness. Early June, hazardous chemical shipment arrives at the clinic. Mid-June, searches for symptoms of thallium poisoning appear on his computer. Late June, Emily collapses and is placed on life support. Each date, each search, each purchase, a step closer to the deliberate destruction of the woman he was supposed to love. When confronted with the mountain of evidence, Matthew's calm facade finally shattered. His voice rose, his face flushed. You think you know me? You think you can ruin my life over some coincidence? Miller stared him down. No, Dr. Carter. You did that yourself. The room went silent again. Moments later, Matthew was handcuffed. The click of the metal echoed like a closing chapter, the sound of control slipping from his grasp. As officers led him away, neighbors watched from their porches, whispering in disbelief. Just days ago, he'd been the charming doctor, the model father. Now he was the suspect in one of the most disturbing cases the town had ever seen. At the hospital, Emily's condition worsened. Despite every effort, her brain activity had ceased. Doctors gathered her family to deliver the news no one wanted to hear: she was gone. Her organs were donated, a final act of compassion from a woman whose life had been marked by kindness. And as her family wept, Matthew sat in a holding cell, staring at the concrete floor. For the first time, the weight of his choices began to sink in. But for Detective Miller, the work was far from over. The case against Matthew Carter was strong, but to secure a conviction, every detail, every motive, every hidden truth still had to be exposed. The autopsy room was silent except for the low hum of fluorescent lights. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and cold metal. Dr. Laura Bennett, the county medical examiner, stood beside the stainless steel table, reviewing the results that would soon become the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Emily Carter's body, pale and fragile even in death, told a story more honest than any witness could. The toxicology report confirmed what detectives already suspected: high concentrations of thallium in her system, far exceeding any accidental exposure. The levels indicated a slow, deliberate administration over several weeks, consistent with her pattern of declining health. Dr. Bennett leaned closer, speaking quietly to Detective Ryan Miller, who stood beside her. "There's no doubt," she said. "This wasn't random. Someone was dosing her repeatedly. It's calculated, controlled, someone with medical knowledge." Miller nodded grimly. "That fits him perfectly." While the final report was being prepared, prosecutors began assembling the case. The district attorney, Lisa Monroe, a sharp and meticulous woman known for her unflinching composure in court, called an early morning meeting at the sheriff's office. Around the table sat Miller, Dr. Bennett, and the forensic analyst who had combed through Matthew Carter's digital devices. On the screen, slides showed a disturbing pattern: online purchases of toxins, a series of how-to articles on concealing poison in beverages, and an email thread with fake invoices labeled wellness supplies. In one chilling message saved in his drafts, Matthew had written, "Once it's done, everything will be fine. She's been sick long enough." The timestamp was from 2 days before Emily's collapse. For Monroe, this was more than enough to push for a murder charge. "We have intent, method, and opportunity," she said firmly. "Now we need to make sure the jury sees who he really is." Detectives continued interviewing those closest to the Carters. Emily's sister, Sarah Holden, provided a heartbreaking account of the final months. "She kept saying she didn't understand why she was so sick," Sarah recalled. "She thought maybe it was stress. Matt kept telling her to drink his vitamin shakes. He said they'd help her feel stronger." Sarah's voice trembled. She trusted him completely. Neighbors described Matthew as charming but controlling. He insisted on managing Emily's meals, her schedule, even her medications. One friend remembered how he'd once joked, "If I don't make her breakfast, she forgets to eat." What once seemed like harmless teasing now took on a chilling tone. As the investigation deepened, more financial records came to light. Credit card statements revealed a troubling pattern of spending: hotel charges in another city, extravagant gifts purchased under a fake account, and cash transfers to a woman identified as Rachel Dean. The affair was no longer speculation, it was fact. When investigators approached Rachel again, she appeared pale and shaken. "I had no idea he'd actually do something like this," she whispered. "He told me she was terminally ill, that he was just waiting for her to pass so we could start fresh." She paused, tears filling her eyes. "I believed him." Rachel's testimony, combined with the financial motive and digital evidence, gave prosecutors the leverage they needed. On July 10, Matthew Carter was formally charged with first-degree murder and evidence tampering. The news made headlines statewide. A once respected chiropractor and father of 6 accused of poisoning his wife, it was the kind of case that gripped the nation. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded the steps. Cameras flashed as Matthew was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his wrists cuffed. He kept his head down, expression unreadable. Behind him, members of Emily's family stood hand in hand, their faces streaked with grief and disbelief. Inside, during the preliminary hearing, Monroe laid out the evidence with calm precision. The chemical purchases. The insurance policies. The toxicology results. The affair. The searches. Each fact struck like a hammer. Matthew's defense attorney argued that the evidence was circumstantial, claiming the chemicals were for research, and that the computer searches could have been performed by anyone. But the judge wasn't persuaded. Bail was set at $2 million, ensuring Matthew would remain in custody as the trial approached. That night, Detective Miller visited the Carter home one last time. The house was dark and quiet, toys scattered on the floor, a family photo still hanging crooked in the hallway. In it, Emily's smile was bright and full of life, her husband's arm wrapped around her shoulders. Miller stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle. Every investigation he'd ever worked had left a mark, but this one felt heavier. It wasn't just the cruelty of the act, it was the betrayal that lingered in every corner of that house. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, he knew the hardest part was still to come. The trial. And the truth, once fully revealed, would shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the first 2 rows, their pens poised, their cameras ready. On one side sat Emily Carter's family, her sister Sarah, her parents, and her oldest son, all united in grief and quiet determination. On the other, the defense table, Dr. Matthew Carter, dressed neatly in a gray suit, his expression unreadable, seated beside his attorney, Daniel Pierce, a seasoned defense lawyer known for his calm but cutting strategies. At precisely 9 o'clock, Judge Eleanor Hayes entered, her gavel striking once against the wood. Court is now in session. The State of Utah versus Matthew Carter. A murmur swept through the gallery. District Attorney Lisa Monroe rose first, her voice steady, her tone firm. Your Honor, members of the jury, this case is about betrayal. It's about a husband who, under the guise of love, turned his wife's trust into a weapon. It's about greed, deception, and the deliberate, calculated murder of Emily Carter. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Over the next several days, you'll hear from witnesses, doctors, nurses, family members, and you'll see evidence that will leave no doubt. Emily Carter did not die of natural causes. She was poisoned, slowly and methodically, by the one person who was supposed to protect her. The jurors sat motionless. Matthew didn't look up. When the defense had their turn, Pierce took a deep breath and began with calm confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, tragedy often breeds misunderstanding. Dr. Carter loved his wife. He tried to help her, not harm her. The prosecution will show you circumstantial evidence, misinterpreted data, and emotional assumptions. But where is the proof beyond a reasonable doubt? He gestured toward Matthew. This man has already lost everything. Don't let speculation take what little he has left. It was a strong opening, but Monroe knew emotion would not win this case, facts would. The prosecution began by calling Detective Ryan Miller to the stand. His testimony was methodical, supported by photos, search records, and bank statements. He described the trail of chemical orders, the hidden vials in Matthew's garage, and the online searches recovered from his laptop. Detective, Monroe asked, how many times did Dr. Carter purchase these substances? 5 separate orders over 3 months, he replied. All shipped directly to his office, all under his name. The defense objected, arguing that others in the clinic could have used his account. But Monroe was prepared. She displayed security footage, Matthew signing for a package and placing it into his office cabinet. Next came Dr. Laura Bennett, the medical examiner. Calm and professional, she presented her findings to the jury. The concentration of thallium in Mrs. Carter's system was lethal. The pattern indicates gradual poisoning, consistent with repeated exposure over several weeks. There's no plausible medical explanation for accidental ingestion at these levels. Could this have been caused by environmental exposure? The defense asked. No, Dr. Bennett said firmly. Not unless she worked in a chemical lab. Which she didn't. Each word tightened the noose around Matthew's defense. Then came the emotional testimony, the kind that quieted the entire courtroom. Megan Lewis, Emily's close friend and co-worker, took the stand. Her voice trembled as she recounted the final weeks. She kept saying she didn't know why she was so dizzy. She'd bring in those smoothies Matt made her every morning. I remember joking that he was spoiling her. Now I can't stop thinking about it. Monroe asked gently, "Did you ever see him preparing those drinks?" "Yes," Megan whispered. "At the clinic. Once I saw him mixing something from a small vial. I didn't think anything of it at the time." Gasps rippled through the room. When Emily's sister, Sarah Holden, testified, her grief filled the air like a tangible weight. She loved him, Sarah said, tears streaking her face. Even when she got sick, she defended him. She said he was doing his best to help her. "I can't understand how someone could do that to the person who trusted them most." The defense cross-examined carefully, trying to sow doubt, suggesting that Emily might have accidentally consumed contaminated supplements or vitamins from the clinic. But each theory fell flat against the sheer volume of evidence. Then came the most dramatic moment of the trial. Rachel Dean, Matthew's secret partner, walked to the stand. Dressed in black, she looked fragile under the courtroom lights. Monroe's tone softened. "Ms. Dean, how did you meet Dr. Carter?" "At a property showing last fall," Rachel replied. "He told me he was separated. He said his wife was terminally ill." She swallowed hard before continuing. "He promised me that once she passed, we'd start a new life. He even talked about moving out of state. I thought he was grieving." Monroe held up a printed text message. "Do you recognize this?" Rachel nodded, tears falling. "He sent it to me. It said, 'It's almost over. Be patient. After this, we're free.'" That was a week before she died. The courtroom fell utterly silent. When Matthew's attorney declined to cross-examine, the judge called for recess. As the jury filed out, Matthew leaned toward his lawyer, whispering something inaudible. For the first time, the mask of control cracked, a flicker of fear showing through. Detective Miller, seated in the back, watched him closely. He'd seen that look before, the moment when even the most confident liar starts to realize the truth has nowhere left to hide. When court resumed the next morning, the air felt heavier, tense, almost electric. The prosecution had finished its case, and now it was the defense's turn. All eyes were on Matthew Carter. He had remained eerily composed throughout the trial, but as the defense began calling witnesses, that calm started to fray at the edges. Attorney Daniel Pierce rose slowly from his chair. "Your Honor, the defense calls Dr. Matthew Carter." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. It was a risky move. Most defendants in murder trials never take the stand. But Pierce clearly believed his client could still persuade the jury. Matthew walked to the witness stand, his polished shoes echoing softly on the tile. He adjusted his tie, took the oath, and sat down. For a long moment, he didn't look at anyone, not the jury, not the prosecutor, not even his own family. Pierce began gently. "Dr. Carter, can you tell the court how you remember the weeks leading up to your wife's passing?" Matthew's voice was low, almost mournful. "Emily had been feeling unwell for months. I was terrified. I did everything I could to help her, supplements, smoothies, herbal remedies. I thought it was exhaustion or maybe a neurological issue. I never imagined," he trailed off, his eyes glistening. Pierce nodded sympathetically. "So you deny intentionally harming her?" "Of course," Matthew said firmly. "I loved my wife. She was the mother of my children. I'd never hurt her. Never." Some jurors looked moved, others skeptical. The performance, if it was one, was skilled. But Lisa Monroe was ready. When it came time for cross-examination, she approached the stand with quiet precision, her tone steady and controlled. "Dr. Carter," she began, "you claim to have loved your wife deeply?" "Yes." "Yet during the same period she was falling gravely ill, you were engaged in an intimate relationship with another woman, weren't you?" Matthew's eyes flicked toward the jury. "That was a mistake. It had nothing to do with Emily's illness." Monroe stepped closer, holding up a folder. "These are your messages to Ms. Rachel Dean. In one, you wrote, and I quote, 'She's been sick for weeks now. It's almost done.' Were you referring to your wife's illness?" He hesitated. "That was taken out of context. I meant, she'd been suffering for so long." Monroe's tone sharpened. "Then explain why you also wrote, 'After this, we're free.'" "Free from what, Dr. Carter?" Silence. His jaw tightened. Monroe let the quiet stretch, then continued. "You increased your wife's life insurance coverage to over $1 million shortly before she became sick. Can you explain why?" "It was responsible planning. We had 6 children," he replied, voice cracking slightly. "Responsible planning," she repeated. "And yet, days before her final hospitalization, you searched for how to administer thallium safely and toxins that mimic natural illness." Monroe paused, lowering her voice. "Would you like to explain how that, too, was responsible?" For the first time, Matthew faltered. His lips moved, but no words came. Monroe looked directly at the jury. This was not an accident. This was a plan. When she returned to her seat, the courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. The defense made one final attempt to humanize Matthew, calling character witnesses, former patients, and colleagues who described him as kind, intelligent, and devoted. But each time, Monroe countered with evidence: the chemicals, the financial motive, the affair, the lies. After 2 exhausting weeks, both sides gave their closing arguments. Pierce appealed to emotion. "This is a tragedy," he said softly, pacing before the jury. "A family torn apart by illness and grief. But tragedy does not equal guilt. There are gaps in this case, uncertainties that should give you pause. Reasonable doubt isn't about sympathy, it's about truth. And the truth is, we don't know exactly how Emily Carter died." Then it was Monroe's turn. She stood tall, her expression composed. "You do know," she said quietly. "You've heard it, seen it, felt it in every piece of evidence. Emily Carter didn't die from fate, or illness, or accident. She died because someone she trusted made a choice, again and again, to poison her, while looking her in the eye and telling her he loved her." She gestured toward Matthew. "He took an oath to heal, but instead he used his knowledge to kill. That's not love. That's control. That's greed. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is murder." The jury was dismissed for deliberation. Hours turned into a full day. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps, waiting. Inside, Emily's family sat hand in hand, their faces pale and weary. Late that evening, the bailiff entered the courtroom and whispered something to the judge. Word spread like a wave: the jury had reached a verdict. Matthew sat upright, his knuckles white against the table. He turned once toward the gallery, his eyes scanning for anyone who still believed in him. There was no one. As the jurors filed back in, silence fell. The foreperson stood, holding a folded sheet of paper. "In the case of the state of Utah versus Matthew Carter," she read, her voice trembling slightly, "we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Sarah Holden buried her face in her hands. Monroe closed her eyes briefly, exhaling the breath she'd been holding for weeks. Matthew didn't move. His jaw clenched, his stare empty, as though the words hadn't yet reached him. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and final. Sentencing will be scheduled within the week. As deputies approached, Matthew turned to the judge and muttered softly, "You'll see. I loved her." But no one was listening anymore. The trial was over. The verdict reverberated across the state, splashed across every headline the next morning: chiropractor found guilty of poisoning wife. To the world, it was another shocking true crime story. To those who knew Emily Carter, it was the devastating end to a chapter they never wanted to read. Inside the quiet suburban neighborhood where the Carters once lived, life carried on, but the laughter of children, once spilling from the yard at dusk, had fallen silent. The family home, with its white shutters and swings set in the back, became a grim reminder of what had been lost. In the courthouse a week later, sentencing began. The room was nearly as full as it had been during the trial, but the energy had changed. Gone was the buzz of curiosity, now there was only a somber weight, a sense that everyone had seen too much. Matthew Carter entered in handcuffs, his face thinner, his eyes hollow. He no longer looked like the confident doctor who had once smiled at reporters. He looked like a man emptied of purpose. Judge Eleanor Hayes read through the sentencing report slowly, her tone firm but not cold. "Dr. Carter," she began, "your actions represent one of the most profound betrayals imaginable, the betrayal of trust, of love, and of duty. You used your medical knowledge not to heal, but to harm. You robbed 6 children of their mother and a woman of her future." She paused. "This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Matthew stared straight ahead, unblinking. For a moment, he seemed about to speak, his lips parted, then closed again. When the deputies led him away, he didn't look back. In the gallery, Sarah Holden held a framed photo of Emily. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "She can finally rest." Outside, cameras flashed as the family exited. Reporters called out questions: "Do you feel justice was served?" But Sarah simply shook her head. "There's no justice that brings her back," she said quietly. "But at least her story is told." For Detective Ryan Miller, the conclusion was bittersweet. He stood in the hallway long after everyone else had gone, watching as the courthouse emptied into dusk. Cases like this left marks, not the kind you could see, but the kind that stayed behind long after the evidence was boxed and stored. "She deserved better," he murmured to himself before walking out into the fading light. In the months that followed, Emily's parents gained custody of the children. The youngest ones were too little to understand, still asking when Mommy would come home. The older ones understood too much. Counseling became a lifeline, for them, for Sarah, for anyone left standing in the wreckage of Matthew's choices. The community rallied around them, holding fundraisers, offering meals, and creating a scholarship in Emily's name for nursing students who embodied her compassion. At the clinic where she had worked, a small plaque now hangs by the entrance, in loving memory of Emily Carter, a nurse, a mother, a heart that never stopped caring. Rachel Dean, the woman who unknowingly became part of the story, moved away quietly. She gave one brief interview months later, saying only, "I'll live with the guilt of believing his lies for the rest of my life." As for Matthew, prison life was silent and uneventful. He spent his days reading, writing, and declining every request for interviews. To the public, he was just another headline that faded with time. But to those who knew him, who had once believed in his charm, his smile, his perfect family, the memory lingered like a shadow. One evening, nearly a year after the verdict, Sarah visited Emily's grave. The air was cool, the sky tinged with pink from the setting sun. She placed fresh lilies on the headstone and traced her sister's name with her fingertips. "You're free now, Em," she whispered. "And we're doing our best. The kids are okay. You'd be proud." A soft breeze stirred the grass, as if in reply. Sarah stood there for a long time, letting the quiet settle around her. She knew grief never truly left, it only changed shape. But she also knew that Emily's story, painful as it was, had given others strength. People had begun speaking out about domestic control, hidden abuse, and the signs of danger they once ignored. Emily's legacy had become more than tragedy, it had become a warning, a reminder, and a symbol of resilience. As the last light faded, Sarah whispered one final promise. "He took your life, but he didn't take your voice." And in that still evening air, it almost felt like Emily was listening.